a sharp, terrifying crack that's unlike anything else on the battlefield, followed by a roar like a freight train tearing past your ear. That's the sound of a German 88, and if you're in an American Sherman tank, it means you have about 2 seconds to live. You're trapped in a steel coffin, listening to frantic radio calls about a ghost in the fields of France, a steel beast called the Panther, whose hide is so thick it seems forged by the devil himself. Your own cannon, which felt so powerful in training, is now a pathetic noisemaker. This was the waking nightmare for thousands of American tankers in 1944. They were hunters who had suddenly become the hunted, facing an invincible predator in a game where the odds were fatally stacked against them. But as the fields of Normandy turned into a graveyard of Shermans, a whisper of a secret began to snake its way from the highest levels of command down to the front lines. A rumor of a silver bullet, a weapon so revolutionary it could slay the beast. But this miracle came with a terrible price, one that would force crews to make an impossible choice in the heat of battle. The M4 Sherman wasn't a bad tank. It was a war winner, a reliable workhorse that America could produce in staggering numbers. But in a one-on-one fight with a Panther, it was a lamb to the slaughter. The core of the problem was brutally simple physics. The Sherman's standard 75 mm gun fired a shell that would hit the Panther's thick, sloped frontal armor and, simply, fail. Crews described a horrifying metallic ping as their rounds ricocheted harmlessly into the sky, leaving a tiny, insulting black smudge on the enemy's armor. For the German tankers inside, it was a source of arrogant amusement. They would sit patiently, watching the useless American shells bounce off, before calmly traversing their own long, powerful cannon. Then came the crack, and another Sherman would erupt in a plume of fire and black smoke. It happened so often that Shermans earned a grim, unofficial nickname, the Ronson Lighter, because it lights up the first time, every time. This wasn't just a technical disadvantage, it was a weapon of psychological terror that was breaking the morale of American armored divisions. What made this slow-motion slaughter so infuriating was that it was entirely preventable. American high command knew about the Panther, but their intelligence reports were tragically flawed, dismissing it as a rare heavy tank that would barely see action. They had a counter, a new Sherman model armed with a more powerful 76 mm gun. Hundreds of them were sitting in Britain, ready for the invasion. But in a catastrophic failure of foresight, the generals held them back. They cited logistical headaches. Supplying 2 kinds of ammo would be complicated, and stubbornly believed the old 75 mm would be enough. It was a decision made by paper pushers in clean offices, completely detached from the grim reality on the ground. By early July 1944, the truth could no longer be ignored. The front lines were screaming for a bigger gun. When General Dwight Eisenhower was finally briefed on the full scale of the disaster, his fury was volcanic. "Why, I thought it was going to be the wonder gun of the war," he raged at his subordinates, his words laced with the bitter sting of betrayal. The generals had blundered, and now tankers were dying, paying the price in blood and fire. As the new 76 mm Shermans were frantically rushed to the front, a team of engineers in the U.S. were perfecting an even more radical solution. It was a new type of ammunition, a projectile that looked like it came from the future, the M93 High-Velocity Armor-Piercing Round, or HVAP. It was a masterpiece of battlefield physics. Instead of a solid steel slug, the HVAP was a lightweight aluminum shell wrapped around a small, razor-sharp core of tungsten carbide, one of the hardest materials on Earth. When fired, this tungsten dart achieved a velocity so extreme it was almost invisible, allowing it to strike with an incredible amount of focused kinetic energy. It was designed to act like a surgical spear, punching through the Panther's supposedly impenetrable hide. But this miracle weapon had a fatal flaw. Tungsten was a strategic resource, rarer and more valuable than gold. With most of the world's supply located in China and every branch of the military desperate for it, production of HVAP rounds was agonizingly slow. For the tankers on the front line, this meant the silver bullet was almost a myth. A crew would be lucky to get 5 rounds. 5 chances to kill a monster that seemed to be around every corner. In the foggy fields near Arracourt, France, in September 1944, the legend of the Silver Bullet would be forged in combat. A new, confident German Panzer brigade, filled with factory-fresh Panthers and green crews, launched a massive counterattack against Patton's Third Army. On paper, it should have been a slaughter. But the morning of September 19th dawned with a dense, impenetrable fog. The Panther's greatest asset, its long-range gun, was useless. They were advancing blind, straight into a trap. Waiting in the mist were the veteran, battle-hardened crews of the American 4th Armored Division, and in their ammo racks they had a handful of the new HVAP rounds. A young American lieutenant peered through his periscope, his heart pounding, as the hulking silhouette of a Panther emerged from the fog less than 100 yards away. There was no time to aim, no time for calculations. "Fire!" he screamed. The 76mm cannon roared, and the HVAP round shrieked through the damp air. Instead of the sickening ping of a ricochet, there was a sharp, metallic crack. A flash of white-hot energy appeared on the Panther's thick gun mantlet. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, the Panther Ace turret lifted a few inches into the air as a catastrophic secondary explosion tore the tank apart from the inside. The beast was dead. Before the surviving Germans could even react, 2 more Panthers were brewed up in the same shocking fashion. The Battle of Arracourt wasn't just a military victory, it was a psychological turning point. The myth of the Panther was shattered in a single morning. The German commanders were in a state of shock. Their after-action reports, filled with panic and disbelief, claimed they were ambushed by a new American supertank, or perhaps the British Firefly with its legendary 17-pounder gun. The truth was so much worse. It wasn't a new tank they had to fear, it was that every 76mm Sherman was now a potential Panther killer. The supreme confidence of the German Panzerwaffe began to crack. Crews who had once felt invincible behind their sloped armor now saw ghosts in the fog. Every Sherman they encountered could be the one carrying the silver bullets. For the first time, they felt a sliver of the same fear that American crews had been living with for months. Fear had switched sides, but the triumph at Arracourt hid a grim, ongoing crisis for the American forces. The HVAP round was a miracle, but it was a scarce one. For every story of a Panther being taken out by a silver bullet, there were 100 crews who had never even seen one. The demand created an agonizing logistical nightmare. Who gets the precious few rounds? The tank destroyers whose sole job was to hunt Panzers, or the Sherman companies, who were on the front lines bearing the brunt of the attacks. The pressure on a gunner who had just 5 of these rounds was immense. Every shot had to be perfect. A miss wasn't just a tactical failure, it was wasting a priceless resource that another crew desperately needed. This agony of scarcity reached a fever pitch during the Battle of the Bulge. As hundreds of German heavy tanks stormed through the Ardennes, American crews fought for their lives with their handful of HVAP rounds. Many exhausted their entire supply in the first brutal hours of the German onslaught, leaving them to face the renewed terror of the Panther and Tiger with nothing but standard shells and raw courage. To make matters worse, crews quickly learned that the HVAP was no magic wand. It was an imperfect miracle. Post-war analysis and grim battlefield experience showed its limitations. The tungsten core was brittle. At longer ranges, where the round's velocity dropped off, it could actually shatter on impact against the Panther's thickest armor rather than penetrate. It was a devastating lesson to learn in combat. A crew might take a perfect shot at a Panther 1,000 yards out, only to watch their priceless ammunition disintegrate uselessly. The silver bullet could still miss its mark, reminding every tanker that skill, positioning, and a heavy dose of luck were still their most important weapons. HVAP gave them a fighting chance, but it didn't make them invincible. It simply leveled the playing field from suicidal to extremely dangerous. In the end, the HVAP round's greatest impact wasn't measured in destroyed tanks, but in restored courage. It was a tangible symbol of hope. It transformed American tank crews from fearful defenders into confident, aggressive hunters. This psychological shift was arguably more decisive than the round's technical performance. The legacy of that desperate innovation is still written in steel today. Modern tanks like the M1 Abrams fire armor-piercing rounds that are the direct descendants of that WW2E era silver bullet. They use impossibly dense materials like depleted uranium, but the core principle is the same: a hypervelocity spear to defeat the enemy's best armor. The lesson learned in Blood and Fire in 1944 was that in the brutal calculus of war, technology is only half the battle. The other half is the unwavering will to fight, a will that can be shattered by fear, or forged anew by a single, perfectly designed weapon that gives soldiers the belief that they can win. Thanks for watching. If you found this piece of history as fascinating as I did, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this. We'll see you in the next one.